Well, good morning, friends, and happy Tuesday. Welcome to another episode of Walking and Talking Tuesday. In today's episode, I am going to be talking about the business of dying. And yes, there is a business side that honestly has to happen when someone dies. And today I'm going to tell you what I've learned in hopes that my experience might be able to help you or someone you know. I'm also going to be giving a life update because if you've been following the channel, you know things are changing, and some big changes are on the horizon. In addition, I'm going to tell you what it feels like to be under the spotlight. And I'm going to share a special encounter that I recently had with a former student of mine. So let's get into it. In case you're new here, my name is Steve, and for the past 7 or so months, I've been chronicling my wife Nancy's journey with terminal brain cancer. And about a month ago, Nancy passed away after a year-long amazing fight with that disease. And for us, sharing her journey on our channel was a way for us to process what was happening in real time. But ultimately, the goal was to be able to share our experience in hopes that it could help others walking the same road. And judging by the many comments from viewers, you all love Nancy. You loved our family, still do, and have gained and continue to gain some new insights and perspective and information from the things that I share. And maybe that's just part of the natural part of being a teacher. I just want to help and just want to share. And so that's what I'll continue to do. Last week I kind of shared the hours right after Nancy passed and what happened and what kinds of things needed to occur. And today I want to talk a little bit about what's happened in the last month. Particularly what kinds of things I needed to take care of, deal with, decisions that I had to make. And that's why I'm calling it the business side of dying. Before Nancy passed away and I knew we were getting close, I was told by the hospice team that if she died in home or actually even in their facility, that they would be the ones to call the funeral home and that I should think about which facility or which funeral home we wanted to use. Well, that's something I'd really never thought about. I know that I've been to funerals and I know where Nancy's, mom and dad had their funeral. But I also knew that Nancy wanted to do things differently, and we had talked about her wishes to be cremated, and we knew we were going to have a service at our church to be more of a celebration of life or a worship service as opposed to a service in a funeral home. And so I looked online and I found I found 3 funeral homes in our area, all within probably a 15-minute drive. And I wrote down their numbers. And then I did a little research about specifically funeral homes that deal with cremation. And I'm not at all here to tell you the right thing, the right type, cremation versus burial, funeral home service or a church service. I'm simply sharing our experience, and then you can use that to make your own decisions. But probably this information will vary country to country, maybe even state to state. So use your best judgment. I'm not giving advice, I'm just sharing experience. That's my disclaimer. So I now had a list of 4 funeral homes, 3 that I've probably been in, and then 1 which was very different. And I'll tell about that one in a minute. And I started calling the funeral homes, and it was honestly the first time that I was out loud having to explain to anyone that my wife had passed away. And each time the person at the funeral home answered the phone and I explained that, they were so gracious and kind, and immediately would offer their condolences, say how sorry they were. They wanted to reassure me that they were there for me and my family, and they would do their best to take care of our wishes and any needs that we had. So that was great. I mean, that's their business, right? And so they do it very well. As soon as they answer the phone, they are helping you feel at ease. And I started asking questions of the first one. And then I got better for the second, third, and then the 4th one I called, I really kind of knew exactly where I was heading. And I explained that Nancy wanted to be cremated. We were going to have a service at our church and really didn't need any of the services that they might offer, but we did need help, obviously, with the cremation. And so each one explained what they could offer. And as cold as it seems, the reality of it is that these things have a cost. And so then they would, start talking about their price list, which was honestly really weird, but I get it. I mean, it is their business. And they would start to kind of talk about what might set them apart from another funeral home. They would talk about, dignity. They would talk about their beautiful setting. And so I really started to gather information, and I was just writing down each one, kind of what they said. When I got to the second one, I actually spoke with the funeral director, and he really, in a succinct way, broke it down for me and explained that in our state, and this probably is the same for every state, don't know about in different countries, but he said in our state, funeral homes are all kind of managed or overseen by an agency, or they have to follow particular guidelines. And one of those is they have to offer a written guaranteed price list, or a GPL. So that was then a piece of information I knew to ask for in future calls as a way to compare apples to apples, right? So there are things that they offer which are standard, and then there are things that are more a la carte or custom. And again, since we weren't doing a burial, we didn't need to worry about a casket. We didn't have to worry again about the service. All of them seem to offer an online way to get Nancy's story out. So think of it as an online obituary. And some of you clicked on Nancy's, I'm sure. That was standard and really a free service that they all offer. They would also offer to put Nancy's obituary in the newspaper. They would print it, and they said it gets really expensive right now. You pay by word, and they said if you have a long obituary written, which I did, they said they would work with me to shorten it to keep the cost down. Nancy and I decided that she really didn't want it in the newspaper. Not that she didn't want people to know her story, but that it seems that most people that we know and that she would want to know about her probably aren't receiving a daily newspaper anyway. I don't know if that's a generational thing. Definitely put that in the comments. If you still read a newspaper and still read the obituaries, let us know in the comment. And if you don't mind, maybe put your age or approximate age. I'm just curious if that's an age thing or just a location thing. So we had agreed that she wanted to have her obituary just online. So I used Facebook for, my regular circle of friends and family and, a little broader people from our church and such. And then we also used the link supplied by the funeral home. And so by the third call, I kind of really had made like a chart of pricing. And surprisingly, the prices were not the same. Each funeral home had their own pricing, just like you would go to any other store. And for those of you that are new, you might be wondering where I am. Uh-oh, why'd I flip around? Gosh, hang on, there we go. I actually am walking around where Nancy and I lived or live. I'm still getting my words right. We had moved into this residential town center 2 years ago just as a bridge between our home, where we finished raising our kids, to where we wanted to end up in retirement up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So we kind of needed this couple of years of a bridge. And so I've been living in a townhouse in this residential area, and there's all kinds of restaurants and shops all around. Things aren't open this morning because it's just after 6:30 a.m. But by 11 o'clock or noon or lunch, this place will be hustling and bustling. And now that it's summer, officially, the green area there behind me is full of activity in the evenings, and on Saturdays there are concerts with live music and vendors come in and all sorts of things. So it's a lot of fun, but it's very busy and sometimes very loud. Which is the complete opposite of what will be happening in the Upper Peninsula. And so if you stick around, I'll be showing you that transition and how it looks and how it sounds coming up in the next few weeks. I just have about another week here before I make the move up north. Okay, so prices were not the same. Another thing that all of the funeral homes offered on their guaranteed price list was the ability to get me official copies of Nancy's death certificate. I'd never done this before, so I really didn't know the questions to ask, so I was getting a really good education. But also I didn't really know what I was going to use a death certificate for. And so the funeral home director I talked to, he explained I would need it for certain accounts. You know, if Nancy had any life insurance or investment accounts, maybe her bank. Every situation is different, but he said most people typically order between 3 and 5 official copies, and then you can make copies of the original, which can suffice for most people or most entities that you have to deal with after a loved one's lost. So I ordered 3 original copies. And there was always an opportunity to order more, and I can get them on my own as well. But they offer as a service just to do that for you, to kind of take the burden away. So by now, after 3 calls, trash truck. After 3 calls, I've got a pretty good idea now of the questions to ask. So the 4th funeral home that I called was one I'd really not heard of, but it popped up in my research of the area where we live as being a facility that offers direct cremation. And that was a term that I had not heard before. And so when I called, I actually got the funeral home receptionist, and she had the funeral home director call me back. And so we chatted, and I asked about the guaranteed price list. And of course, she had it available. And she started talking through what they can offer. And it was very similar to all of the others. However, when I explained that we weren't going to do a full graveside burial, we didn't need the casket, and that we weren't going to use their facility for any kind of a memorial service, she said, oh, okay, so maybe the direct cremation option would be best. And so I said, please tell me more. And she said, well, unlike most other funeral homes in the area, they actually have a crematorium on their site that they own, run, and manage. And she said because of that, they're able to actually offer that service much cheaper than other funeral homes. And I know this sounds, I don't know, kind of cold, talking about the cost of something when your loved one has just died. But the reality is there's a lot of decisions to make, and one of the things you have to decide is how are you going to pay for all of the things that need taken care of. And so as we talked through it, this sounded like it was going to be the absolute perfect match. So because I had not heard of them, I asked some more specific questions, and she kind of told me in on their backstory. They actually had a name change when she bought the funeral home from the previous owner, which I'd actually heard of the previous owner. So a lot of the funeral homes, at least it seems in my area, go on and get passed on in the family. So the name either stays the same because it's the same family, or the new owners might keep the name the same because it's recognized. So her story is she took her name, or actually her grandfather's name, I believe, and put it on the funeral home name. So that's why I didn't recognize it. So it's actually been around in our Dayton area for many, many years. But they offer direct cremation, and sometimes they'll even contract with other funeral homes to do their cremations. So it seems like it was a really good fit. we're able to get all of the same services that the others. Now here's the crazy thing. When I compare the highest price funeral home that I called and their services, and I compare it to the lowest price funeral home and their services, the services were identical. Cremation, I receive Nancy's cremains. I'm able to get 3 death certificates, an online obituary. Pretty much that's what we needed. The price difference between the highest and the lowest was over $3,500 different. And that blew me away. I didn't expect it. I didn't know what I expected. I'd never made these kind of phone calls before. Prices didn't seem to be published online, and so I actually needed to make those phone calls. So the big takeaway is, just like I recommended comparing different hospice agencies to find the best fit for your family and your loved one, I would also recommend doing the same thing when it comes to funeral homes. If at all possible, talk to each other about what your wishes are. Nancy's parents had actually completely pre-planned their funerals, paid for them ahead of time, knew what they wanted on their headstones. My mother-in-law went so far as to even write her own obituary and decide which grandchildren she wanted to read what scripture during her service. And that made it super easy for my sister-in-law to plan that service as she met with the funeral director. And as you recall, Nancy wasn't able to help out with that because she was actually in the hospital recovering from brain surgery when her mom passed, and she couldn't even go to her mom's funeral. So talk to each other. Even if it's an uncomfortable conversation, I think it's far better to know what your loved one wants. Because when you get into this situation and you have to make decisions, it's a very stressful time, and you're gonna have a lot of emotions and a lot of things to decide. And if a few of those things could already be pre-decided, I think it's gonna go a lot better for you. So call several funeral homes, ask about their guaranteed price list, compare apples to apples based on the services that you desire, and you should be able to really quickly figure out which one is going to fit the best for your family. If you live in an area and there's only one funeral home within 50 miles, well, there you go. It could be your choice. But in our situation, there were actually quite a few to pick from. So if you're comfortable and you have something to add about picking a funeral home or comparing, or maybe a story that you think could help someone else, feel free to put that down in the comments. We'd appreciate it. All right. What other business of dying? Let's see, I have a few notes today. Okay, in our family situation, in our marriage relationship, we had different abilities or strengths or interests. Nancy took most of the cooking since she was home when the kids were little, shopping for their clothes and shoes and all of those things. And she was fantastic at that. We decided early on that for our finances, we were going to pull them together into one joint account, not have separate accounts. And again, this is not marriage advice. This is just how we did it. I know people do this all kinds of different ways, and I'm not at all saying this is the way to do it. But it did make it easier for me to deal with some of the business after Nancy had passed away. Because I was the account guy, I paid the bills, we were joint on, all of our financial accounts. But there were a few like store kind of credit cards that Nancy had just in her name. For example, sometimes you'll go to, make a purchase and they'll ask you at the register, you could save 35% if you open a store card today. And, over the years, she had taken advantage of those offers to get some discounts, and she was all about trying to be frugal and save our family money. The accounts that we were joint on, like some investment accounts or retirement accounts, our banking, car titles, those things are easy because my name is on them. Some of these store cards where it was just in her name only, I knew that I needed to call them and let them know about her passing. So a couple weeks ago, I found her purse and I went through a wallet and was cleaning everything out, and I just made a little pile of these cards. So when I started calling the 800 numbers and told them my story, that's when I realized there's actually a special department set up exactly for the situation. There's a deceased cardholder team that helps people close the accounts of people who had died. And so once I knew that, I knew from then on who to ask for, and it went very smoothly. And every time I told someone about Nancy, they were super kind and compassionate and just full of sympathy for my situation. You can tell they're well trained to deal with the situation, and they literally, again, take the burden off the loved one. But the key is knowing where your loved one would keep their account information or keep their cards or know their passwords. Nancy and I, like I said, we were very open and knew each other's information. And I know that's not the case for everyone. So at least have your loved one write down their information. And if there's a trust issue or just a privacy issue, maybe they could put it in a sealed envelope and show you where they're putting it and write on there, do not open until I die. And then, you promise to honor their wishes. But without their account information and their passwords and knowing what accounts are open, I imagine it could get very, very messy. And that's really the last thing you want to deal with when you're already dealing with the loss of someone that you love so much. So all the accounts, the credit cards, funeral home, all of that went very well. People were, like I said, sympathetic. Until I got to the phone store. Nancy and I each had our own cell phone, but with the same store and on the same account. So again, I knew how to unlock her phone and knew her password and all of her information. So I went to the phone store to ask, what should I do about her phone and security and her number? And I walked in and I was paired up with a young man, probably no more than 20 or 21. And he invited me to sit down and he said, how can I help you? Thinking he was gonna probably sell me a new product or a new service. And I started to explain that my wife had just passed and I had her phone and needed to know what to do. And he didn't miss a beat. And he said, well, are you sure you want to give up that number? Because, once you give up that number, you can't get it back. You might want to hang on to that number and just, keep her phone active. He was definitely more interested in keeping the line active, it seemed, than helping me solve this issue. And he was really the only one that never said anything about how sorry he was or his condolences. And it might have just been the day, or it might have been a generational thing, or he just didn't know what to say. But just like the credit card company, there's actually a department for that within the phone company. And he said, I really don't need to do anything at the store. I can just dial a 3-digit number from my phone and explain the situation, and they'll take care of it. So what does it feel like to be put under the spotlight? So I got an email from Francine at Francine's Cancer Journey, and she asked if she could highlight our channel and Nancy's story on her channel, where she does weekly updates called Cancer YouTubers Updates. And she'll talk about 5 or 6 or sometimes as many, maybe as 7 or 8 different YouTube channels that are all sharing their cancer journey. And so I got to meet Francine through that, and she actually contacted Nancy and I later and asked if she could do an interview with us. And we said sure, so we set it up, and she kind of sent us some questions that she would be asking, and we recorded it. She put it on her channel, so kind of like a little collab, a collaboration, and I linked it on my channel as well. So I learned that Francine is just an amazing human being who just loves people and is all about educating the larger community about the challenges of going through and living with a cancer diagnosis. So Francine, thank you for all you do and for your kindness to Nancy and to me. Keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. And then as I begin to wrap this up, I just wanted to briefly share an encounter I had with a former student. And this student was in my class, 30 years ago. In fact, it was the very first year that Nancy and I were fully dating, and we were actually engaged when this student was in my class. And so that's kind of why I remember it. And she had met Nancy, and because Nancy would come into my classroom, and of course, being so much in love, I would talk about her all the time, and the kids were really into that as 5th graders. Ooh, Mr. Huff. So of course they knew about us. Well, of course time goes on, and I get older, and she grows up and goes to college, and she gets older and becomes a teacher. And so when we met there at the grocery store, she was coming toward me, and she saw me and I saw her, and she said, Mr. Huff. It's funny because I know she's got to be 40, and she still calls me Mr. Huff. And I said, Christina. And we stood there and talked for 10 or 15 minutes. And she told me all about her journey as a teacher and where her class will be next year and some of the challenges and successes that she's faced and had. It was just really great. And of course, she knew about Nancy's story. She had followed, it's really loud that way. She had followed her story on Facebook, but didn't know about our YouTube channel. So I told her about Tin Can Ramblers, and she wrote it down, and she was going to look it up. So Christina, I'm so proud of you for the woman you've become, and just I could tell how passionate you are and how you care for kids. And that's what I think we need more of, teachers that just love kids and who are doing it for all the right reasons. So Christina, well done. Well, as I head for home, it's another busy day of kind of packing up and getting ready for my transition to move north. I want to thank you for walking with me, and I just want to end saying that there's a lot of good things coming up for me and my family, and I'm okay. I miss Nancy every single day, and it continues just to come in waves. I know when I get up to Michigan, things will slow down, and those waves will probably crash more frequently and harder. And I know that, and I'm looking forward to just sitting in that and taking the time in the quiet just to listen and reflect and pray and just really try to hear about what is the next right step for me. Because I know if I'm left here on this earth, my purpose has not yet been fulfilled. And so I'm going to embrace whatever that is to the best of my ability, because I believe there is a plan for me. I just need to figure out what it is. We have a huge July 4th celebration. All my kids are coming up and their significant others, and that'll be a blast. I'll show you some of that in a few weeks. My youngest daughter's getting married over the Labor Day weekend, and we're super excited for Emma and Evan. We've got Levi's first birthday to celebrate in October. So all great things. And I look forward to sharing with you more in the coming weeks. So until next time, I hope you have a great day. Thanks for walking.